programs that I work on is the Health and Social Value Programme. So that's around supporting health and care commissioners to embed social value in their procurement processes. And all their priorities have all been around increasing local employment opportunities, training, education opportunities for young people in their local area. So they've used social value in that way. And another priority for them as well has been keeping money that's spent in their locality within the locality, so it doesn't get siphoned off by multinational companies somewhere else. So that kind of works with the local supply chain, buying local, and also reducing their environmental impact in terms of if they're buying locally produced food and things. But Sally, I think, will talk in more detail about specific social values that have been, clauses that have been put into contracts and things later.
Can do. Change the presentation.
Okay. So over the progress of implementation, really, that SUK and Waits did some research in 2014, which to look at how people were using the Social Value Act. And I think Peter alluded to it in the plenary, really, that actually 50% of them, or over 50%, saw that it was actually helping them save money, and innovate as well. And also, helpfully for us, they all saw social enterprises as, or the majority of them saw social enterprises as a route towards social value. What it did flag up was really that measurement was one of the biggest challenges around how they measured social value and how they also communicate that with people once they have measured it as well. And then also, I think was referenced earlier, was the Lord Young review, which is going to be reviewed again in 6 months' time. But this was in 2 years after the implementation of the Act, and it really came up with 3 key issues, which was around the awareness and take-up of the Act being mixed, and a varying understanding of how to apply the Act in inconsistent practice. I think this is partly because actually in the legislation it's only a very short paragraph and there isn't a massive amount of guidance around how you implement it. I mean, the best practice is growing and there's a growing body of guidance around that, but I think some commissioning authorities have been very good at taking that and running with it, whereas others kind of want more of a tick box approach, which leads to the kind of inconsistency in applying it. And again, measurement of social value isn't fully developed. So I know the Cabinet Office has been doing lots of work around trying to improve some of these issues with a commissioning academy, and also like events like today, which brings together people and learning about best practice. And then finally, I just wanted to let you, highlight a couple of resources that are probably quite useful to look at if you're kind of starting off on your social value journey. The research that we did with Waits is called Communities Count, and that has really brought a kind of the findings that we got from that has developed a process of case studies which will help you implement social value. So there are 4 key stages that we've kind of identified from the research around defining, integrating, partnering and measuring the social value. So there's a communities count toolkit, which I think is a really useful tool to have a look at, which has got lots of really good case studies around how other organisations and commissioning authorities have actually measured social value, implemented it, developed partnerships and things around social value policies and frameworks as well. So I think that's quite a good place to start. And the other thing is also that there's a Social Value Hub, which is an online portal which brings together all the information around social value. So there's lots of social value frameworks, policies, case studies of how it's been used in best practice, and also examples of measurement. And then I think Sally can talk a bit more about how it's actually worked in practice and some of the challenges and issues and opportunities that it's brought to some of the areas.
Okay. Thank you. That's all right. I'll do that bit. And then it's meant to go.
Oh.
What about this usual technical hitch?
Oh, no, no.
So your emails
It's okay.
Oh, maybe it might be the yellow one.
No, it's that one.
Oh, okay.
There we are. It's just a little pause to get everybody.
Just ask one quick
Yes,
question.
of course.
Will you guys be sending out copies of the slides to save curious note-taking?
Yes,
I would
so
imagine
Chris-
that all of the attendees will either be sent the slides or they'll be uploaded onto the sort of app platform, so you'll be able to have those. But yes, so that's an absolute pleasure. And there's some contact details on there, so if any questions are raised that you don't think about today, you want to drop us, either of us, an email, then please do. So I'm Sally, I'm the Partnerships Manager at Social Enterprise West Midlands. That's a regional network for social enterprises and socially responsible businesses in the West Midlands, name on the tin. Last year we became part of SE UK, having sort of been around for 10 years. So we sort of originated out of the government funded programme, 5 years of lots of money sloshing around to help organisations like ourselves across all of the regions to support social enterprises, raise awareness of social enterprises and help them scale and grow. When that funding ended, we became a community interest company ourselves, so we are a social enterprise. So that means we have to be an enterprise, we have to trade our own money, and then with our profits, we put them back into still achieving those stated social purposes. So we are principally a membership network, that's what we always decided to be. Other regional initiatives decided on their own kind of delivery to market. And as I say, sort of middle of last year, became part of SE UK, so we're now sort of moving into our third 5-year term, which is really quite exciting. But it does mean that we've got a little bit of knowledge about the social enterprise sector, about the West Midlands, which I don't know if any of you have heard, but you know, we're going through this whole devolution and combined authority thing and the Midlands engine, and you know, big driver Chris White was obviously an MP for Leamington. So, you know, this whole sort of social value is very much being driven by London and all the good work that SE UK are doing from London, but across, you know, the nation. But West Midlands is also being sort of seen as quite a heartland outside of London of social enterprise growth. So that's a little bit about us. It would be really interesting. How many people here are from sort of local authority, public sector? Are you all procurement type people? Are you are? Okay. Commissioning, okay. Commissioning and...
I work with projects and delivery of contracts in the MOD, but I do have a background in local authority.
Okay, excellent. And how many private sector businesses? Oh, 3, okay. And what sort of sectors do you deliver in? Are you construction or are you... Yes. We do know Wilmot Dixon, you're actually a social innovation partner with us. And yourself at the back?
I'm working for Interserve, so...
Oh, excellent. You're another partner with us. Thank you.
I work in education with public schools.
Okay.
Yes, helping them to remain in school as a charity.
Oh, right, okay. So you're sort of getting involved in the free school agenda and that kind of thing?
We give them orientation, role modeling,
Yeah.
career guidance.
Okay.
We encourage them in subjects in which they're weak,
Mm.
the mathematics, the
Mhm.
communication subjects.
Yeah.
And then we use entertainment to attract them to remain in school.
Excellent.
We are partnering with the government because they're not interested in school. They are public schools, so they feel vulnerable, low esteem.
Yeah.
They think there's no need to gain education.
Are you particularly working in schools within areas of multiple deprivation or?
Yes, they are vulnerable. Yes, they
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. And in London or are you outside of London?
It's in Nigeria.
Oh, okay. So you have you travelled the furthest distance to come to the summit today? Blackpool was the furthest so far.
I just traveled to more experience
Yes.
myself.
Excellent.
And see whether what impact was the value of what we're doing.
Okay.
You know,
Oh,
that's-
interesting. And I think that sort of whole knowledge share and best practice is really interesting, both across the social enterprise sector. I think naturally, if you're involved in social enterprise and social value, you're probably of a collaborative nature as an individual and as an organisation. And I do think that one of the things with the social enterprise sector, that there is a huge opportunity around trading internationally, which has yet to be sort of met. So really interested in obviously supporting you know, that sort of knowledge share and best practice internationally as well, because it's certainly working incredibly well in a lot of communities overseas. So lovely to have you here. Do I see, what is everybody else? So there are social enterprises? Yeah? Okay. Five Rivers Childcare. Okay, so you're both in sort of children, young people's type services. Anybody else?
Private as well as Travis Perkins.
Sorry?
I was private sector as well as Travis Perkins.
Okay, right. Anybody? So we've got quite a reasonable mix.
Waste and circular economy, London reuse.
Ah, right. Okay, so interesting.
We're a social enterprise.
Yeah. Okay, lovely. And gentleman at the back.
Housing Association Genesis.
Okay, yes, I know Genesis. Used to work with them quite a few years ago. So yeah, lovely. So really interesting kind of mix of everybody. So what I've tried to do here is put together sort of 3 examples. So I've got a sort of large-scale commissioning organisation, Midland Hearts, as you can see here, to talk about how they tackled sort of social value inclusion from a commissioning perspective. I've then included an example of a private sector, sort of T2, Tier 2 provider. So that's actually listers who are fenestration providers, so windows and doors and the like. Thought that would be interesting. You know, they're not going to be a social enterprise, but they are a very socially responsible business. And then a social enterprise in actually how they can articulate their social value, and that happens to be furniture reuse. So that might be of some interest. But I hope there's something in all of that, you know, sort of taking things away and actually being transferable in the lessons and the knowledge. I think one of the really interesting things that Nancy erred towards is that, particularly from a commissioning perspective, I delivered a workshop to the procurement team of a university in the West Midlands only last year. So the Social Value Act had some traction by then, but obviously a lot of public service organisations, you are big beasts to get moving. You have long-term contracts that you issue to market, so it can take quite a while to get through the contracts register to actually go, oh, we're now about to commission our legal services again. The last time we commissioned it might have been 5 or even 8 years ago because of the way contracts for that type of service can be issued. So it will take inevitably a fair while to get through, if you like, your whole contracts register before everything has been commissioned with the thought of social value in mind, in line with the Act. And obviously as you go down that path, you perhaps gain more confidence and feel as though you're able to include greater innovation in the kind of outcomes that you're looking for in terms of social value. So the one thing I would say is we're all on a journey, you know, and it doesn't matter whether you're at the beginning of the journey and you're smaller scale, whether you're at the end of the journey and you're smaller scale, large scale, whatever. But certainly within this procurement team, it's about a dozen people from a major university, very innovative, very forward-thinking university. And given it was just before the elections last year, I had views. I wasn't there to tell them how to do procurement. They are the procurement experts. I have a knowledge, but not an absolute specialism in the way that they do. So I wasn't telling them how to run an ODU tender or whether they were doing their jobs well enough. It certainly wasn't a performance review. But I was there to kind of create some conversation around how do they include or how do they consider social value within their commissioning and tendering processes. So you've got sort of service specification, you know, head of function, I need to, you know, put out my grounds maintenance contract. What am I looking for when I'm actually going to be putting that contract out this next time, and putting in the preparation, if you like, at that early stage before it gets into the actual sort of procurement team and the ODU tendering process itself and the legal compliance and good governance around issuing a tender to market, particularly a high value tender, let alone then it comes back to contract management, you know, so whatever you said and put in your service level agreement based on what was proposed in the invitation to tender, how do you actually manage that through the term of the contract? So very, very interesting when we talked about social value and the Act and how much traction there was, how much leeway there was, and we talked about the Localism Act as well. And I had the views from, it's all very UKIP, isn't it? Right the way through to, well, we can't do that, it's ODU or die, almost. Can't do attachments, it's all very two-dimensional, it's just got to be compliant. To other people kind of going, isn't this exciting? We can use the Localism Act and we can lock things down and we can actually really engage local markets. It doesn't exclude the large national provider. So previously their setup for one of the contracts I'm going to talk about with Midland Heart, very much homogenised contract. So you had a homogenised national provider. Nothing wrong with that. But the way that Midland Heart, and the example that I'll put through here, it was about actually how you open that up potentially as well to smaller local providers, much as what we've been hearing from with the plenary speakers. So it went all the way through to this excitement of we can use the Localism Act, we can use the Social Value Act, fantastic, let me get my hands on it, I want to get back to my desk now because I've got a contract that I want to be able to start sort of thinking about how we challenge that. So again, I think that really supports that inconsistency, both in terms of confidence of individual, knowledge of individuals. So if you've got a subcategory manager, maybe they're doing the high volume, low value spend, they might only need to get 3 or 5 prices from the market. If they don't know about social enterprises, they can't ask social enterprises necessarily to put a price through. But that £2,500 sort of small contract for outsourced catering for a couple of events might be a really, really key investment for a small social enterprise within the locality. But it's no good, as one social enterprise said to me, you big pointy finger, the commissioner, you need to send me personally the email that says you need that catering. And it's like, really, that's not going to happen. So the social enterprise sector needs to step up to the mark as well. But I think from the commissioning side, it's actually how do people approach you? How accessible are you? And is your information? Most organisations will know if you've got big contracts, it will go out through your e-procurement portal. Lots of portals out there that you can register your area of goods or services and you can get your tender alerts. But how do you make accessible those high volume, low value contracts, which actually are probably really, really valuable to your very local communities as a commissioning organisation? I think that is a challenge that I would kind of, put back to you to consider as you go through the day, and how can you open that door a little bit more. Does that sort of have some resonance? Is anybody kind of like working maybe on the commissioning side on those sort of, high volume, low value contracts, or using social value really well within their sort of tender and feel like they're doing some good stuff and getting some good responses? A wry smile from the gentleman in the middle row.
Well, I head up a commissioning team that covers drugs, alcohol, mental health, and prisons. And
Okay,
so
yeah. Interesting agendas, yeah.
Some of the most challenging of people in Royal Borough of Greenwich that I work for. And we've set up some social enterprises which basically were the solution to our aftercare for drug and alcohol. And we're progressing from that. I've got a tender at the moment that is involving questions on social value, but it's been a struggle.
Okay. Okay, well certainly on our website, and I'm sure through Social Enterprise UK as well, if you need any particular support, help, guidance, reference points in terms of, what are other local authorities perhaps using in terms of direct copy in clauses.
Yeah.
You've got organisations like Cumbria who are very, very good in their clauses and being public about sharing that.
I think it came up in the sort of earlier questions. I think the key point for local authorities perhaps is reassurance.
Yes.
It's not,
you don't want to be on the top of the headlines of the papers in a couple of weeks.
It's a good thing,
yeah.
But it's not enough to say it's a good thing. It has to be, and I think what I like about we've had a lot of contact with Social Enterprise UK is a business-like nature of it. You make it business-like, you make it real.
Yeah. Yeah, some pragmatic solutions. Okay. Anybody else? Any thoughts or? No? Okay. So I'll just talk about sort of Midland Heart and this example. The reason I've actually chosen this particular example is because Midland Heart approached us as Social Enterprise West Midlands, and we had an approach from their procurement team before the Social Value Act came into being. So they weren't going to wait until everybody had done it and everybody had, you know, done that check and test, and then they were going to kind of follow along. They really wanted to go, we know this is coming, we want to be ahead of that curve, and we really want to start sort of embedding this both culturally within the organisation, as well as actually making this sort of demand, if you like, levering that goodwill, if you like, of their supply chain. So I think that was really interesting, and I think there is still a relevance to having this, because not everybody is up there and feeling quite bullish and quite confident in how they're commissioning social value, what it means, being able to look at the outcomes that you want from a contract before you specify it, or as you specify it and before you put it out to market. So Midland Heart had a bit of a homogenised contract, as I said. It was covered, as you can see, their grounds maintenance, communal cleaning and window cleaning. You can see it was a single provider, 1.8 million per annum, and it was a 5-year term contract. So it was kind of quite big and chunky. But when they actually looked at the coverage of the properties that were included in this, they realised that there were actually quite a few small pockets. There were some really awkward areas to kind of deliver. So they decided to lever the Localism Act and actually lot it down into 31 lots. And if you're a commissioner or a head of service, you'll be going, oh, hang on a minute, 31 lots instead of 1 lot. That means more money, more resources, more capacity, more onerous. Whoa, hang on a second. But bear with me. I hope we'll kind of get down that sort of end of the journey. So we were asked to work with them in terms of the tender documents and the clauses, how they actually framed those questions. So we had a look at those. And some of the interesting things were to level the playing field, which was their objective, was how do we get more local supply chain involved here? Not just social enterprises, there's no bias towards social enterprises, but within the small, medium enterprises, social enterprises do sit comfortably in there and want to compete with business on a level playing field. They didn't want to exclude regional providers, and they didn't want to exclude national providers. It was about opening up the market. So we worked with them on the tender documents and how it was phrased. So things like grounds maintenance, that was really interesting because they had a plant list as long as your arm. And it's like, you know, you've got to have 96-inch wide grass cutters and this, that and the other. Well, the way that they phrased the question was, do you have this equipment now? Well, if I was a large-scale business, even like Wilmot Dixon, I'm not going to have all of that plant sitting in a lock-up waiting to be used. I want it out there working for me. And if I'm a small local business that maybe is at that sort of point of scale and growth, I'm thinking, I'd love to go for that contract, and I could do that, you know, those 2 lots or those 3 lots kind of thing. But I haven't got all that equipment at the moment. So just by changing the way that the language was used is, this is the required plant list to deliver the contract. Can you guarantee that if you're awarded the contract, you will have access to that plant list? Yes, I can. I don't need to have it now. I don't need it to be, you know, void at the moment. But if I'm awarded the contract, I then have the confidence to either purchase or to go into lease or hire arrangements, etc. So that suddenly meant that obviously a larger number of people could actually go, I can tick that box. Whereas previously saying, have you got this at the moment? I'm going to put a cross against it because no. And in the same way with the cleaning and window cleaning, I think the window cleaning, one of the smallest lots, was literally 34 properties. The required liability was a cut and paste from Midland Heart. Obviously, as you can imagine, they normally have 20 million liability. So that's what they put in the 34 lots, 34 houses for 1 lot for window cleaning. I'm a little local window cleaner, maybe a father and son business or sole trader, possibly looking to take on an apprentice if I get this. Have I got to? I can't afford £20 million liability premium. But being proportional about it, and again, using that sort of, you know, if you are awarded, can you guarantee? Yes, I can then tick that box. It just makes it more accessible. So some of it is about, you know, within the framework of ODU and commissioning and your procurement strategy, that, you know, there is a degree of where is your flexibility, where is your common sense, your pragmatism in looking at some of this language. And that, again, I think is where it's really important to do that prep stage, look at the service specification, because by the time it's gone down to the procurement team, it's already written into the tender documentation, and that's it, it's gone out with that £20 million liability insurance, whether that's relevant for that particular contract or not. So that was the kind of way we worked with them. Because we have 300 members across the West Midlands, obviously a high proportion of those are social enterprises. They were very keen to engage with the social enterprise market. We also have a number of private sector businesses within membership. So we worked with them to do a Meet the Buyer event. At this point, they had a 80% idea of what they were looking for in terms of the service specification for the contracts, but they hadn't put them out to market. This wasn't a sort of a meet the buyer as in, right, now go away and do your expression of interest. This was still informing service specification. So we did a session about social value, what it was, how it applied, why it was suddenly, you know, this language was coming out. So again, this is Midland Heart saying, we're not going to spring this on you as a supply chain. We're going to help you through it. We're going to hold your hand, not with any, you know, bias, but again, kind of pass out that education piece. And I think that is really important. Wilmot Dixon, you know, we work, and the conversations that I have with Victoria are very much about, well, if you've decided what your social value is as a whole organisation, which is very different to the social value you may add into an individual contract, and you know the social value drivers from the commissioning organisation, Liverpool City Council, for example, you can marry that up. But then you're working with a whole T2, T3 supply chain. How do you pass out that explanation of social value from the commissioner, from you as an organisation, and share that with your T2, T3 supply chain so that they can explain, not change their business model, but they can identify what social value they already deliver, and they can bring that back to Wilmot Dixon as the prime contractor and go, here you are, and you've got 30 subcontractors on a contract, and they're all going, here's our bit of social value. And then you as the prime contractor can take that back to Liverpool City Council and go, we can not only do all of this, but we've done all of this throughout the supply chain. And that, I think that accumulation, if everybody's doing a little bit, we can achieve so much more together. So the Meet the Buyer event really kind of was about, really that had that ethos, that approach to all of this. So it gave social enterprises, small, medium, private businesses, regional providers, national providers, the opportunity to talk to the service specifier, and for the service specifier to be informed by the market in what was achievable and what was possible. So they often, at Meet the Buyer events with these contracts, they had struggled to get 20 organisations there. We were delighted that in working with them on that sort of event management piece and prepping the market, that we managed to have 85 organisations and several members from each organisation. So we talked to them about social value. Midland Heart talked to them about what social value meant to them. They had the heads of service actually going, you know, I actually am responsible for the grounds maintenance, you know, this is what I'm kind of looking for out of this. But then they actually had teams from the different estates, the neighbourhood teams, etc. They had some residents, and you could go to the table at the back and you could actually look at the plan and see where the houses were that you were looking at, you know, window cleaning services, or, you know, talk about the type of building that it was in communal and what was the sort of social economics, what were the tenants and residents like, how involved, what were the important factors to them. So it was a whole conversation exchange. Then they did the final specification for service. Then they put it out through to the market, and then they actually had, as I say, 52 completed PQQs, which was considerably more than they'd had previously. And I think the thing that they were really delighted in was the 40% of social enterprises actually submitting and feeling able to submit confidently, that they understood what was required. They felt that they had a place at the table to put their ideas and their service delivery to the commissioners. So what happened? Well, 5-year contract was issued. You can see that there. They actually appointed 8 contractors instead of the 1. So, you know, as I say, if anybody's a commissioner, there's probably a sharp intake of breath at this point. However, they believed that they had already, you know, from the Gershon report and year-on-year savings, which had been around for quite a while, they believed they'd already cut this contract to the bone in terms of cost to deliver. They didn't want to commission it as just a value for money, lowest cost wins contract. They really wanted to look at that best value model. So is everybody familiar with best value models as opposed to a value for money model? Anybody not quite sure that wants to put their hand up if they want to brief? Yeah, okay. So value for money would normally be efficiency, effectiveness and economy being lowest price. And often that value for money does tend to lead, not always, but it does tend to lead often to lowest cost is more likely to be awarded contract. But the best value model includes those 3 E's and the 3 P's, so people, planet and profit. So people is obviously the sort of, helping people to reach their potential. The planet is the environmental aspects, so obviously things like recycling the waste from grounds maintenance, so grass cuttings, etc., rather than going to sort of landfill, can they be used in a different way in terms of composting and resale composting materials? And then the profit in the 3 Ps is actually about what you add to the local regional economy. So that's very much about the jobs creation, keeping local spend, etc. So if you combine those 3 E's of the value for money model and combine it with the 3 Ps, which is kind of the social value model, if you like, then you get more of a best value. And then you get whole life costings in terms of, if we buy it slightly cheaper, are we going to have to replace it after 3 years? Whereas if we spend a little bit more money, will we not have to replace it until 6 years? Well, that brings another cost model, but that's another workshop. So they commissioned this contract to market. They still received, through using 8 contractors, more local businesses, they still managed to actually make an overall saving over the whole term of the contract. So we had that 1.8 million spend per annum times 5 years was the whole value of the original contract. But over the 5-year term, they still estimated that with the awards that they've still made a further £750,000 saving. So I think that endorses again what we were saying in the plenary sessions. When you kind of look at it and take that investment in the pre-preparation of tenders and contracts to market, you can still get a better service, you can still get great value for money, you can still make savings, but you can also improve quality. So the top sort of bullet points, really down to that 750 savings, are the outputs from the contract. Is everybody comfortable with outputs and outcomes? Yeah? So the top sort of 3 bullet points were very much the output, so some nice ticks there. The lower bullet points, though, are much more the outcomes, so the engagement that they now have in terms of their residents and actually using their residents within those neighbourhoods where these services are being delivered to actually train them up and upskill them to be their on-the-ground quality assurance, if you like. So that's really engaging a much more partnership approach with your tenants and residents and getting them involved in the communities in which they live. So that whole ownership, that pride of where they live. And it's created some really sort of interesting outcomes around how now the housing associations are sort of working with their tenant and residents. And they've taken that model forward into other areas and other contracts. Does that... Any thoughts on that one?
Quick question.
Yes, of course.
Do they have to increase the numbers in their in-house team to support this?
No, they haven't. They have had to make some additional capacity investment from their in-house team to work with some of the social enterprise because they may be working. So cleaning, for example, one of the cleaning social enterprises has been appointed. Their staff team within the cleaning company come from the deaf community, with people with hearing disability. So there has had to be a little bit more of investment in terms of the Midland Heart staff team, learning how to work with that organisation. And again, I think that came from the question on the floor. But now they've made that little bit of investment, they're getting so much more benefit in lots of ways, both outputs and outcomes, and benefits that they didn't really anticipate. And I think when you go back to the measuring piece that Nancy was talking about, often you might be able to think, well, if I issue this contract to market, I'm going to get these outputs and I'm going to have these outcomes. So that's great, that's fantastic. I can list all of those down and I can see what tick boxes come back from suppliers when they're putting in their tender bids, etc. Then you'll have some outputs and outcomes that actually don't work. They're what you thought you would get, but they just don't work. And then there'll also be lots of things that you didn't even really think that you were going to get that actually might be the real gems. So that evidencing and measuring and reporting back is really key because you don't always know what you're going to get back. And that was a prime example of working with that particular social enterprise. They're now working because obviously they have tenants and residents who have hearing disabilities, and actually that's one of the key benefits is that those tenants and residents are absolutely delighted that they've got a way of communicating more comfortably with the people that are coming in on a regular basis to their place, their environment, their place of living, and actually they feel much more comfortable with those people. So
Yes,
Sorry, just,
that's okay.
I mean, I think it all sounds really positive, so this question isn't meant to be as negative.
No.
But just thinking about the cost saving that they identified,
Yeah.
did they do any form of looking back, so pre-December 2012, in terms of looking back in terms of the value they were receiving before, to really understand the savings that were brought by the social value approach?
They had done, in that they'd done that piece of evaluation on how the contract had been delivered to market previously, and they genuinely believed that they couldn't make any more savings on that contract. They really thought they were cut to the bone, and they were, you know, as with a lot of commissioning organisations now, and certainly local authorities, it's like, we've only got this budget, that actually barely allows me to deliver statutory service. Libraries are a prime example within local authorities at the moment. So they had that challenge. I couldn't say what their level of confidence was. I would always sort of from the work that I've done with them, I'd say there's a good 80% level of confidence in the data and the figure because of auditory processes that housing associations have to go through. And very, very professional finance teams and finance directors looking at all these things, usually at quite a macro level. So I think they were kind of, you know, quite confident that there really wasn't that any more slack. And again, the Gershon driver has been around for probably about 15 years, if I'm about right. You know, so year-on-year savings, it's, you know, all the fat's gone, broadly speaking. So I think it's that challenge to go, if you can take the time, talk to the market, engage the market early, really understand what you want to achieve from the contract, and is it the transformational outcomes that you're looking to achieve. If you're a local authority, you're a social enterprise by your principle of operating, really. You're there for your communities, for your neighbourhoods, to provide good service, to provide places that people want to live and work, feel safe, etc. So by your very nature of the service that you deliver, I think almost local authorities, because it's, you know, council tax and it's, you know, bins are going to go every 3 weeks instead of every 2 weeks, it's, you almost have become the bad guys. But actually your purpose for being is very much a social enterprise purpose. It's trying to improve neighbourhoods, trying to improve opportunities for individuals and communities. So I would always say to social enterprises and commissioners, walk a mile in each other's shoes, you know, and that's where I think both sides need to come to the table, perhaps better than they have done. But I think I see a real willingness from certainly the commissioners that I deal with Wolverhampton City Council yesterday. And they really are keen to engage the social enterprise sector, as well as the local business community in private sector businesses, as well as work better with other stakeholders. So things like business charters for social responsibility, which some local authorities are kind of putting their clearly stated core themes of social value out to the market. Birmingham City Council have developed one where they've stated their 6 core themes, ethical procurement, buy local first, etc. And they are encouraging all of their supply chain to actually submit their own action plan that fits with those 6 core themes if you want to be a provider to Birmingham City Council. Well, that's a great initiative. It's 2 years old now. We're doing sort of an impact evaluation piece at the moment about. Now they've got a big, you know, piece of sort of Excel wallpaper with all these different interventions from, you know, 300 plus suppliers. But what does it all mean? Other local authorities are kind of saying, actually, that's a great thing, a bit unwieldy to manage, because it's then got to take somebody to contract manage all of those interventions and what people have said they will do, and are they doing them, etc., or are they just completing them as bid candy? And I don't mean that in an adversarial way, but it happens, and social enterprises sometimes get pulled to be named in a bid, but don't always then get used as proposed within that bid. You know, that can be frustrating. But the real sort of driver there, I think, is actually how organisations really sort of work together, that willingness, and it comes from the lead from the key stakeholders. So it isn't the council on their own. And a lot of councils are saying to me in the West Midlands, we don't want this to be seen as a council-led initiative. That's because if they go out to market and go, this local authority is going to do this and we're supporting social value, everybody will go, thank you very much, dear local authority, you do it for us. They actually want to pass the ownership into the communities, the sub-regions that they're operating in, and kind of almost get that grassroots upwards engagement. So there's quite a lot that I'm working on in the West Midlands in about half a dozen different areas, which is sort of, that's the driving principle. So one of the new charters, which is about to be launched in March, has actually a little less on the action plan, still very strong on their 5 core themes of social value, but they've actually got their charter signed by the 8 principal stakeholders within their locality and their sub-region. So it is the CCG, it is the Blue Light Services, it is the university, it is the social housing provider, along with the local authority, etc. And I think that's quite powerful. So it isn't saying you must do this if you want to subcontract with this local authority, but it's the local authority clearly laying out what their key agenda is in terms of social value, and that it's supported by all of those stakeholders. So if they go to the CCG as a health and wellbeing provider, they don't get a different message, because I think that's from the supplier side of things. That's the frustration that we have with commissioners, is that, you know, you're working with 2 different departments within the local authority and you get 2 different sets of tender documentation, let alone if you go to the local authority that's right next door, 5 miles down the road, it's another completely different set of tender documentation, etc. But I think having one common set of tender documentation is utopia. It's a step too far at the moment, however. Any other questions at this point, or should I move on to a private?
Just some observations, really.
Yes, of course.
I worked at Harrow Council in 2011.
Okay.
And although we didn't engage social enterprise, we ran a similar exercise around repairs and maintenance, housing and main buildings. So the approach that you took was very similar, and we ended up with breaking up into a number of lots,
Okay.
exactly in the way you've done.
And did that work for you? Did you find it sort of gave you better quality, better engagement, any lower price savings, or any interesting surprises?
I think it ended up saving, the forecast was up to 10% saving, but it was closer to 20% for a higher volume and better customer service.
Fantastic.
And that included, we built some models showing the different options of going with the different ways of structuring the bid, the lots and so on.
Yeah.
And in Harrow, they actually ended up putting a small number of people back to manage the contracts.
Fantastic.
So that was modelled into the bit, and that saving included the cost of putting those people back.
So you need to be at the front here. You need to be doing this bit, and I need to be sitting at the back there somewhere.
And the other thing that was really good out of it was that if you looked, there were lots of specialist bits about CCTV and lifts maintenance that were individual lots. But on the main lots about actually doing the repairs and maintenance, we ended up with 3 providers over the contract term. And although they were given areas of Harrow, what they were basically told was, if you're not performing, we're going to shift the volume into the ones who are.
Yes,
So
I've heard that quite a lot in contracts management, yeah.
So there was actually commercial tension throughout the whole term, rather than just to the point when you do the bid and then you can relax.
Yeah.
So it's Interserve, I shouldn't be telling you that.
Okay, well, thank you for that insight. You know, and it's I think we're in a trusted group here. We're all here to learn from good examples and less good examples. So.
And I think the message is there's some areas where the smaller number of lots works really well.
Yes, but it's not a carte blanche on everything. Yeah, and that's where the thinking and the planning piece comes in. You know, so yeah, really key.
As I'm from Interserve as well, yes, absolutely. There are, and that's a different scenario, but there's sort of non-safety critical types of environment where this can work.
Yes.
It can be easier for people.
Yes.
Because, you know, are people out looking at the health and safety of the employees doing that work, the health and safety of the tenants in that area, which a tenant won't necessarily understand in the way those services are being delivered. Yeah. But I think one of the things we struggle with, and clearly the large provider needs to be able, almost in this model, to compete with the smaller social enterprise. But sometimes we find local authorities are still not asking that intelligent question. So we get the superficial, how many apprentices are you going to put on this contract?
Yeah. Social value is apprentices. Well, it's a whole lot more than that. And yeah.
Trying to encourage them is why?
Yes.
Well, because we have lots of unemployed people.
Yeah.
Okay, so where's that being driven from?
Yeah.
Well, it's being driven from young people coming out of education and not having a job. Okay, are there any particular hotspots in your area where that's happening?
Yeah.
Okay, now we, because we're a bigger organisation, can, targeted by you, engage with those potential school leavers. We can give them wider opportunities within our organisation where they may not live, may not work locally, but will still live locally and spend their pound in your area. We can support people in CV writing. We go into schools and tell people what our world looks like and what services we deliver and what they need to do to get across that hurdle of engaging with their first employer and getting that first opportunity. And I'm not saying that small organisations can't do that, but one of our frustrations, as I think Adrian was quite clear, is that we're still being asked, and I sat with some members in the Circuit Council a few months ago, and it was very much, how many apprentices are you going to guarantee that you put on this contract? Asking the wrong question. Here they've obviously asked some really good questions, but there are debates still around, the outturn of this, and failure is not an option. So metrics and statistics, as we've mentioned earlier, need to be carefully referenced back because an increased local employment, if you see our social capital mapping tool, that's what that's all about. And rights of GP, so the same people are coming across in the first instance, and if they're, are they spending their pound locally? Are they spending the pound? Are you employing the right people in actually the right areas of deprivation in that location to really drive?
And certainly building social capital is the next hot topic. It's very much emerging. So it's not just about your outputs and your outcomes and your social value impact. It's actually about what's the legacy piece, what's the social capital that you're building. So I think there's some really interesting points that you raise there, certainly. And I think some of that mapping piece, because I know a couple of the prime contractors are really looking at a real hyper-locality. So it's not just within that sort of bit of the borough. It's down to Mrs. Jones and her family at number 27 on that road. What can we do for her, almost?
If it's a housing authority, where are your particularly difficult estates where there's a lot of tenant damage with antisocial behaviour? How can we intervene there? So it's really interesting that the forefront of this, which I think you've ably described, is asking the right question and doing the right engagement. And the challenge for the larger organisations, as Adrian said, is how do we respond? And we were going to be in competition with some smaller organisations, might be slightly nimble, might be slightly more local, and then we're up for the best value.
And sometimes I think it is with the prime contractors, is there a piece that you can do, particularly in construction? It's going to be very difficult to put a social enterprise construction provider in at the same level on the types of contracts that perhaps Interserve and Wilmot Dixon deliver. Excuse me, but it doesn't stop you understanding the social enterprise opportunity within that project site locality and actually understanding how you might be able to work with them better. So whether it's a social enterprise that has engagement with ex-offenders into employment pathways through construction, so projects like Midlands Together, can you work? Is there a part of the ring fence project over your 5-year build, 3-year build, whatever it may be, that actually you can kind of work with those sorts of organisations? So understanding that better, getting really involved through networks like, say, West Midlands, we can signpost people, but understand where your local network is, and that's where SC UK can again sort of advise and guide.
Sally, I was just looking at the time. We kind of
still got 2 examples to go.
I know. I was just wondering, do you want to pick maybe one of the examples and then we open up for more general questions? Or
I'm happy. Shall I show you very quickly what the 2 case studies are, and then you can pick one? So this is a T2 supplier, so private sector company, and in that sense, this is if I just go through this one very, very quickly. They basically will never be a social enterprise, but they are very, very socially responsible business. So when they are working both either in the supply chain to the prime contractor or to the commissioner, they can actually articulate what their social value is. So they don't just say, well, we can put those windows in and we can meet this specification and triple glaze and soundproof and da-da-da-da-da. They can actually say, and along with all of that, which, any good fenestration provider can provide, technically specified equipment, but they can produce this information. So I can talk a little bit more at length about that. Or I can talk about a social enterprise, which is Forces Support. So this is sort of furniture reuse and recycling, clothing donation. You see many charity shops on the high street, and they are a growth sector in their own right. But it's actually about how this particular social enterprise and charity, so they do their free fundraising through their charitable arm, they do their trading through their social enterprise arm. It's actually about what they do in terms of the donations that are made and actually how they turn that into sort of further social value and impacts within their community benefit. Any hands up for a 5-minute run through? This one. Everybody happy with this one? Okay. So Forces Support, they actually have 17 locations across the UK now, where, as I said, there's 2 in Kidderminster, for example, in the West Midlands where I'm from. I know they're down in Oxford and they're also up in Scotland, etc. So usual thing, you take in your bag of clothes and go, I want to donate my bag of clothes, or I've got a bed or a chest of drawers that I don't need anymore. Can you come and pick it up? Fantastic. What they do as a whole organisation is that they support, as you can see, the well-being of bereaved military families. Interestingly, with SAFA, fantastic organisation, they deal with the partner of anybody that has bereavement or disability while serving. But actually what Forces Support do is they treat the whole family, so they treat the parents who have lost a child, they treat the children who have lost a parent, so they have a more holistic approach. What they do is, with the money that they raise through the donations, is that they employ a couple of small works teams, and those works teams go to the bereaved families. They work with Lee Rigby's family as an example. If there's disability, they will go and re-landscape the garden so that individual can still access the garden, they can raise flower beds, but they will also put in a memorial arbour in the garden. So it looks part of a normal garden setup, but it's actually a memorial space for the person that the family has lost. They'll put in play areas and Wendy houses for children, and again, so that's the child can kind of use that as a reflective space in terms of remembrance. They'll go and do housing repairs, small works, putting up shelves and painting and decorating, replacing kitchen doors, those kinds of things. So it's really about improving environment and quality of life, but they do a wraparound care in terms of counselling, support, and sometimes, just as we all may need, somebody that will spend the time and sit and have a cup of tea with them and have a chat and maybe kind of understand sort of, what their world looks like a little bit more. But having worked with a number of charitable reuse organisations, I know that there is a tiering almost, the prime selectors. So when you put all your things in your bag at home and you send it off to your local, perhaps hospice, it might only be that 2% or 5% of what you donate actually gets to their store. The rest of it will go into a warehouse and then it'll go to landfill. They won't even pass that down through the T2, T3 supply chain that exists within charitable shops and these sort of furniture reuse organisations. With Forces Support, they actually 98% of everything that they are donated goes into resale and reuse and recycling. The way that they do that is they employ apprentices to do the shabby chic, the upcycling, that's a very key part of sort of waste and environmental impacts. You can see the amount of bulky waste that they've saved from going for landfill, so obviously that saves the environment from that side of it. It also saves fees in terms of waste landfill. So particularly for organisations who are prime contractors here, if you're going in and doing a local authority building refurb, you often will go in and there will be a whole room stacked up with a local authority, 200 office chairs, 50 desks, various pedestals, various chest drawers, etc., and it was all going to go scheduled to go to landfill. Well, Forces Support came, picked it up, they've put it back and distributed it across all of their shops. They've resold it. The money they've made goes to supporting the bereaved families, paying for the small works team, paying for the arbour materials, etc., to go in. Families that have been supported, so these are whole families that again would have been perhaps sort of cut a little bit loose and left rather on their own, and there's not enough provision there in terms of counselling per se, regardless of military families, regardless of bereavement. Counselling is a really short supply, and it is a much needed service within the community. Having worked at the YMCA, the GP Gateway was an 8-month waiting list when one of our residents eventually said, I need some help, I need some counselling, by which time they've jumped off the top of the multi-storey car park. That's the difference that we're all trying to reduce that demand, yeah, so that that person can get the right support, that they can actually move on and live their life well. So they've created jobs and, as I say, environmental impacts and all sorts. And that's actually what it's all about. I think that's what all of us really are here for, whether you're a local authority, whether you're a Wilmot Dixon, sort of working on a project build or a social enterprise. That's what it's about. It's about helping people smile again, put quite simply. I love a quote, so that's my Richard Branson quote, and I do think that that's what we're here, so if you want to be that employer of choice, if you want to be that provider of choice, that great businesses are places where problems are solved and lives improved, to me, encapsulates why we're all here today. That's the end of my bit. 2 minutes to go. Any questions?
Do you want to take a general question?
Of course, more to Nancy or myself, yes.
Yes. I'd like you to please bear with me because I haven't looked at the Act itself. Because what I want to know is, what does the Act say enterprises must do or businesses must do? What does it say they must do?
The simple answer is it doesn't.
It doesn't, yes. And it's aimed at the commissioning authorities, so it's not speaking directly to social enterprises or charities.
It doesn't say okay. How does who qualifies to be called a social enterprise?
It's actually.
It doesn't say that.
It doesn't say that.
We
could get into a debate about.
What it does say is it tells public authorities to take social value into account when awarding contracts for services. It doesn't define what social value is. It doesn't define how they should take it into account, and it doesn't define what should be done.
And also doesn't define how to evaluate whether they have.
No, there's a lot going on around the evaluation, so social impact toolkits, and Nancy referred to some, and I know that we've got other providers of toolkits here. So you've got Social Value UK, do social return on investment to help you measure the interventions that you deliver. What does that mean? How do you equate what you do with what the ladies over here do in children and young people services in the UK? If you use the same toolkit, you'd be able to say, actually, your services deliver £11.71 for every pound spent with you, and your services deliver £13.94. So there is a way of, through proxy values, giving a financial value to an intervention.
I think
it's a broad. There is.
They're horrendous.
Yes.
They have no relation to what I do.
The locality is an
it's
issue,
that
and
helpful.
internationality.
Really, isn't there?
And
the best they do, in my view, is that they measure the cost saving to society, which is very, very different from the impact. And that's one of the things that, as a contractor and talking to commissioners, you need to think about the value that can be created, not just the pound note.
Yes, it's the transformational benefit to the individual, and how it transforms their life experience, their potential. I mean, I have to say on that one, SIAMs are here. They've got principally a health and wellbeing toolkit that they've developed, which is very much about the transformational journey of the individual. And it also measures what would have happened to that individual if you hadn't done that intervention. Because I think that's a really important aspect. It's all very easy to sort of go, well, we did because they came to our job club and CV writing skills workshop, they got a job. Well, really? There was probably a combination of, 7, 8, 11 different factors that enabled that person to get a job. The job skills and CV writing might have been one of them. But understanding the impact of what may have happened had the intervention not taken place, as is important as understanding what happened because the intervention did take place. And actually, what's the legacy piece? So could something have been done differently that would have created a long-term positive outcome, rather than actually you might have a short-term positive outcome? So it's how can you balance those changes?
Sorry, I was just going to mention PwC have done some work on proportionality of measurement as well, which I think is also worth having a look at. And I think it's worth bearing in mind that one way isn't going to work for every contract or commission, so you might have to use a variety of techniques to measure.
I think that's probably it's not so much about using one tool to give you
No.
one answer.
No.
I think in
And
certain circumstances
because
one
if
will
the
be.
one answer will not be right,
Mm.
it needs to think about a variety of
Mm.
ways
Yeah.
of looking at it. And some of the things that you're putting up there, increase in tenant satisfaction. Okay, how do you actually...
How do we measure happiness?
But some of the problem with that is you have no comparator beforehand.
Exactly.
Yes.
So what
Yeah.
you are asking people to
Yeah.
do, whatever level, is to take a punt, and that's
Yeah.
part of our
But
challenge.
when you then come round to renewing the contract
When you
next
take them
time,
together.
Exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
it's the dialogue, isn't it?
but when you come round
are
to renewing the
taking
contract
punt,
next
you take
time,
otherwise.
you'll have some baseline data.
Yeah.
So we've got to start somewhere, I think, is,
It's
yes.
a journey, and we're 2
Yeah.
years into the journey,
Yeah.
and if it was more descriptive in the act, it would never have got through.
Yeah, so it would have taken much longer.
Another string I'm interested in people from the local authority background, some of the local authorities we work with, of course, they're very price sensitive, cost sensitive.
Yes.
Our main drivers, that's a great example, they're aware there's savings and there's net benefit, but actually our costs are labour, materials and subcontractors. If you want 30% savings, something is going to happen in that
Yes.
dynamic. And what they talk to us about is how many apprenticeships do you want. Actually, the conversation we're also trying to start, that they're not measuring, is the negative, how do we manage the negative social impact of what we're about to do to deliver you that, and actually all the positive social impact we can bring with us will probably not net off against the fact that you might have 100 people delivering the service now. We need 70.
Yeah.
That's 30 people. How do we support them as part of our proposal,
Yeah.
and how do you evaluate that?
I think that's a masterclass in the making.
Yeah.
We'll pop your name down.
And just to note, there is a measurement masterclass this afternoon as well, if anyone wants to go to that.
But they don't consider the downside and how we help manage the downside.
Yeah.
And there are some very short-sighted decisions being made. We work with a housing association, a local authority, I think, wouldn't support the foyer. The foyer shut, all the people turned out on the street. They don't become a problem for the local authority.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah.
Do you know the percentage marks that were given to the price in your 3 examples?
Not to the price. I mean, I could find out if you wanted to drop me an email. You'd be very welcome,
Yeah.
and I'll provide whatever information is public.
Because it was alluded to earlier on, the percentage marks for price is not going down.
No,
In
I
our
mean,
intelligence
generally
in terms of
speaking,
major contracts.
the local authorities and the other public commissioning organisations that I work with, I would still say broadly 40% on service specification, 40% on price, and probably now we are moving from about 5 to 10% on social value up to 10 to 20% on social value.
Yeah. There's been tenders of 80% on price.
Yeah, as I say, we can't take each individual one. We're sort of just trying to give a general response. But I'd say that's probably about the proportion. But, I've got procurement and commissioning people in the room, so...
Yeah, we've seen in the contracts that have come to us a change within the last year that's increased or decreased price and increased.
We've flipped our 60/40 basically to 60% quality because you get a cheap bid and it is exactly that, it's a cheap bid.
And I was speaking to someone the other day, and they were talking. They were saying that they were actually fixing the price of the contracts and then going out with that. So effectively, they are being judged on the quality of them rather than.
We're doing that at the moment with some long run stuff, like sort of meeting with market suggested, but some you can't.
Yeah, obviously.
That was mentioned in the preview earlier, wasn't it? Was we've got this much money, what can you give us for it?
Yeah.
Rather than saying we want this, how much are you going to charge us?
Yeah.
The other thing from our perspective that can make life difficult, and from Greenwich, but it certainly applies particularly in London, is that you can be working with a local authority in one borough and looking to work with a local authority in the next borough, but your apprentice might live on the wrong side of the street and therefore doesn't count.
Yes.
And sometimes that would be nice to join us a bit.
Yeah.
Or you've got somebody that, you've had a contract and you've had an apprentice for a year, and that contract's now come to an end, and actually we try really hard to help
To
the
place them
apprentice
sustainable
finish their
employment.
apprenticeship.
Yeah.
But the new contract with the new local authority says, you've got to have a new one on, and continuing one doesn't count. And that, okay, because of who we are, we wouldn't dream of chopping that apprentice off. But actually that's the behaviour that it's driving.
There's a really good model around the Aspire group based up in Stoke and Staffs, where they've got social housing provider, they've got their enterprising futures kind of arm, and then they've got their enterprise foundation. But the way that they use their apprentices, and they've levered the supply chain all the way through, you know, right down to sort of T4, and they were previously sort of placing about 80 apprentices, and they're now working with nearly 1,000 companies that will actually take and offer sustainable employment to apprentices.
I just think it's, I mean, I think you were saying it earlier, it's been about creative and working together to do this stuff rather than the old ways of being focused.
I do see change. I do see willingness and traction, you know, not only about the Act, but actually how the Act can be used. Even because it's there, it at least says, you know, consider it. Well, that opens a conversation. And I certainly, you know, I do respect the fact that local authorities are working in difficult economic times. Prime contractors, you know, you might have quite a few zeros on your balance sheet, but you're still working to very tight margins. So, you know, you aren't the sort of panacea of all gifting for all social value outcomes. But it is proportional and relevant is key. No, yeah.
That we can only help and contribute and work with others.
It's finding the right partners.
That's a key as well.
Yeah.
You can't work with everybody to achieve, and that we can achieve more by doing that.
I'm conscious that we're eating into your lunch.
So thank you very much for coming along.
We'll hang around for a bit
the rest of the day.